How not to explode with rage, born and bred cules, when you see how Real Madrid built its empire on a house of cards propped up by historic refereeing corruption. This isn't some barroom conspiracy theory, it's not the whining of sore losers, it's the raw, undeniable truth that has finally burst into the open, backed by irrefutable evidence that once and for all sinks Madridismo. Jewel, if you feel this fury in your veins like I do, like this post and subscribe so that together we can expose more truths that will sink Madridismo, because Barça doesn't need favors to be eternal, but it does deserve justice. Let's keep going, this is only the beginning. And what's coming will be an earthquake for those who think they own Spanish football. Imagine, Blaugrana brothers and sisters, a world where Barça, with its unmatched style, legendary youth academy, and unshakable passion, has had to fight not just 11 rivals on the pitch, but an entire system designed to favor the eternal enemy. Hidden evidence now reveals how, from the darkest days of the dictatorship to the modern era, refereeing has been the secret weapon that paved the white path while tripping us up at every turn. Here's an exclusive that will sting in the capital, because the veil of lies protecting their so-called greatness has finally been lifted. We're not talking about isolated mistakes, no. We're talking about a systematic pattern of refereeing decisions that stole titles, tipped the scales, and turned Madrid into an untouchable club. And while they boast about their trophy cases, we know many of those cups bear the mark of injustice. Think about how, decade after decade, Madrid has benefited from ghost penalties, gifted red cards for their rivals, and added time that seems to stretch forever until they score. Meanwhile, at Barça, legitimate goals are disallowed, phantom fouls are blown against us, and we're left playing 10 versus 11. This isn't coincidence, it's corruption rooted in the history of Spanish football, with origins in Francoism and branches that stretch to the present day. Remember how Franco used Madrid as propaganda, how referees knew that whistling against the white club risked their careers, and how this created a legacy of impunity that endures. Evidence is emerging now, declassified documents, confessions from former referees admitting to pressure, all pointing to the same truth. Madrid was the system's golden child, while Barça was the rebel that needed to be broken. And no, we're not exaggerating. Look at the historical stats on penalties awarded, red cards forgiven, decisive matches where the whistle always leaned toward the Bernabeu. This is what was stolen from us, cules, not just matches, but the chance for an even more glorious history. Imagine if, in those key years with Kubala or Cruyff, we had competed on a level playing field. How many more leagues, how many more Champions Leagues would we have? Madridismo trembles because these revelations aren't rumors, they're facts that demolish their narrative of natural superiority. They talk about mystique, about epic comebacks, but how many of those comebacks were paved by compliant refereeing? We, on the other hand, built our legend against all odds, with football that makes the world fall in love, and that's worth more than any gifted trophy. That's why today we shout loud and clear, enough lies, enough cover-ups. Barça is exposing this evidence so the world knows the truth, so Madridismo drowns under the weight of its own hypocrisy. And while they try to distract with cheap excuses, we stand tall. Because being a cule means being part of an epic resistance against corruption. Let's keep digging, because every detail we reveal is another nail in the coffin of their false greatness. We won't stop until football justice acknowledges what they owe us. Get ready, because what's coming will be a ruthless examination packed with undeniable facts, injustices that cry out to the heavens, and a cule passion that won't be extinguished, not even by 1,000 stolen refereeing decisions. This is for everyone who suffered in the stands, for everyone who saw what was rightfully ours taken away. Visca el Barça, and let Madridismo tremble. The origin of all this excess dates back to the Francoist era, when Real Madrid wasn't just a football club, but a political tool serving a dictatorship that needed to project power and grandeur abroad. Franco, the dictator who oppressed Catalonia and everything Barça represented as a symbol of identity, saw in Madrid the perfect instrument to whitewash his international image. It's no secret that the regime facilitated star signings for the White Club, like the paradigmatic case of Alfredo Di Stefano, who was destined for Barça but ended up at Madrid thanks to direct political intervention that twisted the fate of Spanish football. Imagine the impact. A player of that caliber could have changed Barca's history, ushering in an era of absolute dominance, but instead, he was handed to Madrid to build its first great European dynasty. Meanwhile, what was happening with refereeing? Referees, many of them aligned with the regime or fearful of reprisals, knew full well that harming Madrid risked not just their careers, but something far worse in those dark times. Matches at the Bernabeu became farces where dubious penalties were awarded to the home side, offside goals were allowed without a second thought, and any protest from Barça resulted in sanctions or unjust red cards. This wasn't clean football, it was an extension of the political repression Franco imposed in every sphere. Barça, as a Catalan club, was seen as a hotbed of dissent, which is why opportunities were denied, ridiculous fines were imposed, and the team was forced to play under suffocating pressure. Think about how, during those years, Madrid piled up leagues and European Cups while Barça struggled to survive in a hostile environment. This wasn't pure sporting superiority, it was systemic advantage, and these practices weren't limited to Spain. In European competitions, Madrid enjoyed an aura of untouchability that came directly from political backing, causing international referees to also look favorably on the regime's team. Queues, this is the seed of the corruption that has endured. A club that benefited from a dictator to rise to power. Meanwhile, we, with our resilience, began to forge an identity that would transcend borders. But let's not be fooled, this refereeing corruption didn't end with Franco's death. It has transformed, adapted to new times, but the pattern remained the same, favoring Madrid at Barca's expense. Decades later, we see echoes of this in the suspicious appointments of refereeing committees dominated by Madrid influences, in decisions that always seem to tip the scales in the same direction. It's infuriating to think about how many titles were snatched from us because of this corrupt system. How many nights of glory were stolen from us because the whistle was never neutral. And now, with historical evidence emerging, federation documents revealing direct pressure, we can shout louder than ever. Madridismo is sinking under the weight of its dirty history. No excuse holds, no narrative can save it. Barça, on the other hand, emerges as the true hero, the club that triumphed despite it all. Let's continue unraveling this infamy, because every detail brings us closer to the truth they fear so much. Imagine if we had had impartial referees in those 1950s Clásicos, Barça, with its indomitable spirit, would have dominated mercilessly. But no, the system was rotten from the root, and that's what we're exposing today with Furia Culet. Moving forward in the timeline of this refereeing shame, we reach the 1960s and 1970s, a time when Real Madrid, already established as the regime's club, continued to enjoy preferential treatment that bordered on scandal. In La Liga, where competition should have been fierce and fair, Madrid racked up titles thanks to refereeing decisions that, in hindsight, seemed drawn from a script of shameless favoritism. Think of key matches where, with the score tied or unfavorable, a dubious penalty was awarded in the opponent's box with a generosity never extended to Barça. Or those absurd red cards for Blaugrana players for minor fouls, while at the Bernabeu, hard tackles were forgiven without a card. This wasn't coincidence, it was a system where referees, many trained under Franco's shadow, internalized that Madrid was untouchable. Barça, meanwhile, faced relentless scrutiny. Legitimate goals were disallowed for non-existent offsides, added time was cut short when we were winning, and the refereeing criteria changed drastically depending on the stadium. Remember how, in seasons when Barça had competitive teams with figures like Johan Cruyff arriving to revolutionize football, refereeing became an insurmountable obstacle. Leagues were decided in the final matches with glaring errors that always benefited the same team. And not just in Spain, in the European Cup, Madrid continued to reap success with help that, while less obvious, was noticeable in the knockout stages where controversial decisions propelled them forward. Queues, this is pure rage. Imagine how our club, with its philosophy of total football, could have dominated Europe much earlier if we hadn't had to fight against this millstone. But Madridismo, blind to its privilege, boasts of these victories as if they were purely meritocratic, ignoring the context of corruption that underpinned them. Historical evidence now reveals internal federation reports admitting strategic appointments for Madrid's matches, something never granted to Barça. It's outrageous, it's unjust, and it's why we shout louder today. This corruption didn't stop in the 1970s. It evolved, became more subtle, but the harm to Barça persisted, robbing us of opportunities for glory we rightfully deserved. Let's dig deeper, because every decade we analyze adds more weight to these revelations that sink Madridismo in its own misery. Think of those Clásicos from that era when Barça arrived with hope and ran into a refereeing wall. Fouls not called, goals allowed under dubious circumstances for Madrid, and an atmosphere of impunity that left our blood boiling. It wasn't football, it was a farce orchestrated to maintain white hegemony, and while the world began to recognize Queuel talent, the Spanish system constantly tripped us up, ensuring Madrid stayed on top. This hidden evidence, now emerging, confirms what we've always known. Historical refereeing was an unconditional ally of Madrid and an implacable enemy of Barça. But our passion doesn't fade. Instead, it burns brighter with every injustice remembered, driving us to reclaim what's ours. The manipulation wasn't limited to the pitch. The press played a crucial role in protecting Real Madrid and demonizing any complaint from Barça. In the 1970s and 1980s, Madrid media, as extensions of white power, downplayed any refereeing scandal favoring Madrid, presenting it as inevitable human error. Conversely, if Barça benefited from a rare decision, a media circus erupted, accusing us of victimhood or conspiring against Spanish football. This created a toxic narrative where Madrid appeared as the noble club, winning through superiority, while Barça was painted as the eternal winner. Think of how newspapers like Marca or AS dedicated entire front pages to glorifying white victories, ignoring refereeing controversies, and amplifying any error against Madrid as if it were a crime of lèse-majesté. This hidden evidence we're revealing now isn't just documents or confessions. It's the hammer that sinks Madridismo in its own hypocrisy, demolishing its narrative of natural greatness and exposing that much of its trophy cabinet bears the mark of corruption. Jewel, if you feel this fury burning in your veins like I do, if you've suffered from every theft in the stands or in front of the TV, it's time to raise your voice louder than ever. What historical refereeing theft hurts your heart the most? Which title do you think was directly stolen from us because of this white corruption? How do you think football history would have unfolded if we had competed on a level playing field? Leave it all in the comments. Subscribe now with all your cool passion. Like this video and share it so the world knows the truth. Because together, as a united Blaugrana family, we reclaim our true history, demand justice, and shout loud and clear that Barça is, was, and always will be the greatest club of all. Without favors or corruption. Visca el Barça forever.